Al-Bayhaqi narrated from al-Shafi'iyy that he was asked about al-Qadar, and he replied by reciting 4 verses of poetry. He said, مَا شِئْتَ كَانَ وَإِن لَمْ أَشَأْ وَمَا شِئْتُ إِن لَمْ تَشَأْ لَمْ يَكُنْ خَلَقْتَ الْعِبَادَ عَلَى مَا عَلِمْتَ فَفِي الْعِلْمِ يَجْرِي الْفَتَى وَالْمُسِنُّ على ذا مننت وهذا خذلت وهذا أعنت وذا لم تعن فمنهم شقي ومنهم سعيد وهذا قبيح وهذا حسن. Which means, O Allah, whatever you willed to be shall be, even if I willed for it not to be. And whatever you did not will to be shall not be, even if I willed for it to be. You created the slaves in accordance with your eternal knowledge, and the old person and the young act according to that. You endowed good things upon some of them, and you made some of them misguided. You helped some of them, and some did not. Among them are the shaqi, who will have a bad ending, die on a bad status, and the sa'id, who will have a good ending. That means he ends his life on a good state. And among them are the ugly and the good. Al-Shafi'iyy defined al-Qadar as the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is al-Mashi'ah, the will of Allah. So this is another definition for al-Qadar, different from what we mentioned before. So we mentioned about al-Qadar, this is al-Qadar of Allah, the attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala we're talking about. Some scholars said managing things in accordance with the eternal knowledge and will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this includes the deeds of the person, whether good or evil. Some scholars said al-Qadar, which is the attribute of Allah azza wa jal, is making things as they are. Now Imam al-Shafi'i defined al-Qadar as al-Mashi'ah, the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said al-Qadar is al-Mashi'ah. The meaning of the first verse from the saying of Imam al-Shafi'i is, O Allah, whatever you will shall happen, and whatever I willed would not happen if you did not will for it to happen. This means that everything happens by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You will to do something, we say, if your will comes in accordance with the eternal will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you would achieve what you willed. If your will doesn't come in accordance with the eternal will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you won't achieve what you willed. Sometimes you might study all night at the uni, for instance, because you want to get high marks in your test. You might study all night, you sleep at 1 o'clock, let us say in the morning, then you wake up at 3, then you study, just you want to pass in the exam and you want to get high marks. At 6 o'clock, you get sleepy and you say, I want to sleep half an hour, then after that I'll wake up. Then you sleep. You don't wake up maybe until 11. You miss the exam and you fail. What did you will the night before? You willed to study to pass in the exam and to get high marks. What did Allah willed in this case for you? Allah willed for you to sleep in the morning and you miss the test and you fail. So the will of Allah Azza wa Jal was fulfilled and your will wasn't fulfilled in this case. You will to do something. Now, if Allah willed for that thing not to happen, you won't get it. Whatever you do. Like Allah willed that all human beings will die. None of them will be everlasting. Now, if they look at the one who is the richest person in the world, can he protect himself from death? He can't do this. Because Allah willed for all of them to die. So no one can protect himself. Allah Azza wa Jal said, يُدْرِكُّمُ الْمَوْتِ وَلَوْ كُنْتُمْ فِي بُرُوجٍ مُشَيَّدَةٍ. Death will come unto you even if you are in a shielded towers. You have towers and that tower is shielded properly, protected. Death will come to you. Death will come to every person because Allah willed for every human being to die. So the will of Allah Azza wa Jal is fulfilled. So that's the meaning of the first verse of what Imam al-Shafi'iyy said. The second verse means, O Allah, you created the slaves according to your eternal knowledge. So the actions of the young and the old happen according to your eternal knowledge. Neither the young nor the old act except in accordance to the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third verse means, you, means Allah, guarded part of the slaves and granted them the belief, piety, good manners and high status. And you did not grant other slaves these things. So you support some of the slaves to do the good deeds and others you do not support. Allah does whatever He wills. The fourth verse means, the slaves are of two types. One type are those whom Allah willed for them to die as believers, and these are the people of happiness. Sa'id, we call him Sa'id. And the other type are those whom Allah willed for them to die as blasphemers, and these are the people of misery, Shaqi. Those that Allah willed for them to die as blasphemers, those are the people of misery, those are the non-believers. The situation related to the happiness in the hereafter or the misery in the hereafter does not change. So we're talking about now the end of the life of the person, whether he's gonna die on a state of happiness or on a state of misery. This matter does not change because it has been decreed by the eternal will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is, the one whom Allah willed for to die as a believer will die as a believer. And the one whom Allah willed for to die as a blasphemer will die as blasphemer, regardless of their situation before dying. A person might live in Islam for years and years and years. Then he ends up his life by committing blasphemy. So the ending of the person is not changed. That means Allah willed eternally that that person will die as a blasphemer and that person will die as a believer. Allah willed eternally for that thing to happen and that thing to happen. So it does not change because the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not change. So this is the meaning of the words of al-Shafi'iyy. In summary, al-Shafi'iyy interpreted al-Qadar by al-Mashi'ah, the will of Allah. Because when a person asked him about al-Qadar, he immediately said, "Oh Allah, whatever you will to happen will happen, even if I did not will it to happen. And whatever I will to happen, if you did not will it, it shall not happen." So al-Qadar is the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then he clarified that the will of Allah is in compliance with His eternal knowledge. That is, Allah willed what He eternally knew will happen. So the will of Allah and the knowledge of Allah Azza wa Jal goes in accordance to each other. The will does not go against the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The will of Allah agrees with the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That means what Allah eternally knew that it's gonna happen, that means Allah willed for it to happen. What Allah eternally knew that it's not gonna happen, that means Allah willed for it not to happen.